Part 2 of The Whistling Monsters by B. Wallis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Part 2. From where Vance lay, he failed to note any reason for the Indians' apparent dread of the place. True, it was wild and forbidding, like all canyons, though lower down he had noticed many sections where the walls on each side receded and gave place to steep slopes of broken hillside, running to the base of distant bluffs. But here at the journey's end, the walls drew in and towered aloft in vast frowning heights, and the canyon terminated, or, at any rate, continued only at a higher level, for the shallow creek through which the two men had often splashed now fell from a great height into the wide black pool they lay beside. Certainly it was a wild, cheerless spot, and the walls were grimly black, and stained by weather and age, and dank with a pervading seepage from the surrounding hills, only coarse ferns and pendulous giant mosses clinging to clefts and niches to hint that life could still survive even in this grim sterility. Yet beyond the inborn antipathy of the human species to gloom and solitude, Vance failed to note any reason for their marked distaste of the spot. "Deegan, you're a blithering fool, and a blind one, too," asserted Vance, dispassionately, and the deliberate insult of his tone pierced the tough armor of its target. You blasted pup," was all the enraged Deegan could retort. "Suppose we cut out this stuff," suggested Vance, in a bored and weary tone. "I merely intended to draw your attention to the fact that the rubble across this pool is, I presume, a fair sample of the beach under us, and if you note closer to the wall, the fragments are larger, and, being higher up, not water-worn. Now it seems to me that possibly by a distressing effort we might reach this jagged stuff, and, well, perseverance and friction have been known to have a deteriorating effect on many substances," he added, meditatively. "Curse your highbrow drunk! What in thunder are you?" And then abruptly Deegan's wrathful growl subsided, and a sudden surprise and fierce hope swept into his eyes. "Huh, that's so. Well, what of it? We ain't there," he said grudgingly, yet commencing to strain and contract his muscles in an effort to roll on his side and verify Vance's surmise. About the same second, both succeeded in facing the bluff. Hardly a dozen feet distant, it towered upwards for at least 200 feet, and for the first 50 feet it presented a face almost as smooth as a vast sheet of plate glass, black, vitreous, and sheer. Plainly an intrusive stratum of igneous origin, for across the pool also lay this forbidding face, while above and to each side of its 30-foot width the enclosing bluff was badly shattered, a jumbled mass of deep fissures, broad ledges, and receding terraces, where grew a matted miniature jungle of stunted shrubs, rank creepers, and giant mosses, fed by the seepage from many a mile of surrounding range, and here coalescing into tiny rivulets that ceaselessly dripped as a transparent veil down the bare lowermost wall. Age, extreme age, was indelibly stamped on this somber chasm, and the grim walls were touched by vanished eons when the new-born world scarce had been released from the labors of its birth. But for the two fettered men there lay but one absorbing problem, the dozen feet of sloping rubble, which stood between them and the more recent droppings of larger, sharp-edged fragments which lined the base of the bluff. How could that space be traversed? For only by the most strenuous effort and a more than Spartan stoicism had the little matter of a mere turning where they lay been effected. Already their drying rawhide fetters had drawn so taut. Deegan was the first to break the silence. "I don't know," he said thoughtfully, "but I'll try." And for the first time in many days his voice had lost the jeering, overbearing note which had so angered his partner. "Say, Vance, are you game to help? It'll be hell, but we gotta win, and I ain't sure I can stay with it alone." And as if the acknowledgment exposed a flaw in his manhood, his voice betrayed a shy hesitancy almost ludicrous in one of his self-reliant, assertive nature. "Go ahead, Deegan. I'll do my best," said Vance simply. As before, he had been the nearer to the pool, so now he was the farther from their goal, though barely by a pace. "Well, it's this way. I got it doped out, and I'm going to roll up this blasted slope. But if I ain't got a stopper behind, I'll roll back sure. If you could hitch round to grab my pants in your teeth, I reckon between us we might make shift to wedge you T-shape agin my middle, and you'd act as a stopper for my next turn uphill." "It'll hurt like hell, partner," Deegan added gravely and apologetically. "What if it does? If you can stick it, that goes with me," Vance replied stubbornly, though not ill-naturedly. And without further parley, they commenced as frightful and grueling a contest as ever was waged, for from the first moment it required indomitable will to endure the excruciating agony which racked every inch of their swollen, tortured flesh, a trial of endurance and fortitude in which neither of the contestants would admit a better man than himself, and each would rather have died of agony and exhaustion than suffer defeat. Inch by inch they wormed their way across the sloping rubble, and with every inch some stiffening thong cut even more deeply in the sunken furrows where the flesh had burst and the thong vanished. Sweat and blood bathed them in mingled streams, clotted and dried as it welled through their garments, so that soon they caked and rasped the flesh beneath, wearing it into broad raw weals where the exposed nerves ceaselessly writhed in torment. Life had resolved into a mere sensation, a frightful nightmare of pain, and an obsession which dominated it. The obsession that no torture hell could conjure would compel either to slacken for a single second and acknowledge himself the lesser man. Alone or with a kindred spirit, then the thing would have been impossible. Simple flesh and blood could never have endured it, and life itself would have been gladly surrendered to sink into the nirvana of surcease. How long the passage of that dozen feet encompassed they never knew. Time had ceased, swallowed up in the greater dimension of sensation, and alone was marked by the inches of the gory trail they had come. And at last they scaled that slope. "Done, by heaven!" croaked Deegan raucously, and Vance simply laughed a harsh, choking cachinnation more animal than human. Then, for a little, both lay still and silent. "Got to get moving. Scrape's stiffen soon," muttered Deegan, and the thick utterance issued from his cracked lips as though dragged forth by rack or fire. "I know. Keep moving," mumbled Vance in response to some hazy train of reasoning. And at once his muscles responded to the suggestion and commenced to work and strain against the hellish bite of his fetters. A little fumbling and squirming, and Deegan found a sharp-edged fragment firmly lodged, and successfully wedging himself in a position which brought his bound wrists in contact with it, he commenced a ceaseless sawing movement that only his iron muscles and indomitable will could have sustained. Between his fettered wrists, where he essayed by this primitive tool to fray the thongs, the space would scarce have housed a knife blade, and quickly the jagged stone had rasped the flesh from his wrists and hands as each slight motion, backed by the weight of his bulk, drove the rough edge deeper between them. But moment after moment, without pause, the clock-like pulsing of muscle held on, and ever his upturned rugged face was set as grim and passionless as the rock beneath him. Then suddenly Deegan rolled on his side, and a deep groan broke from his blood-stained lips, and in the same breath there followed a whispered curse. "Hell's curses on the scum!" he said with intense bitterness. "You're free!" exclaimed Vance harshly. "I got the use of my arms, but the blasted things seem made of red-hot stone," growled Deegan as he strove to recover their mobility. And in a little his arms, moving in curious mechanical jerks, obeyed his will. "I'm boss of you anyway," he muttered, savagely eyeing with morose vindictiveness the offending members. Then picking up a sharp-edged splinter of the black rock, he turned his efforts upon his legs, and shortly the last thong had been severed. "Blast you!" he cried, and picking up a handful of the crimson-painted lengths, he cast them savagely into the pool below. And scarcely had they alighted with a loud swish and flutter of spray when a deep-noted resonant whistle rang out, echoed from wall to wall, and died away in a trembling whisper. End of Part 2.